for when you get into this area, if you could get people in there?
Well, what you're looking for is, this is clearly a place where there was a heavy fuel burn. You've got a portion of the engine right here. You've got another portion of the engine here, and you've got some landing gear up over here. It is most likely the center core part of the aircraft. That's where the center fuel tank is. That's where the fuel from the fuel in the wings are funneling back to the engines. It's the most flammable part of the plane. It's also the strongest
How much
part of the
difference does it
aircraft.
make? You can't get investigators into here right now. You need them in here desperately. How much difference does it make that this guy is here, that other people are walking through this site?
Well, it is very disturbing. I mean, you cannot have people just picking through parts. Sometimes there are very small parts that make a big difference. Sometimes there isn't. But in any case, when I was at the NTSB, we prosecuted people who were standing doing things like that.
What can you tell from some of the bigger pieces, even from the photographs?
Well, this is an interesting piece, eerily like some of the large pieces from TWA 800. What you see is a tear. You also see no sooting. It was obviously probably a later piece of the plane that came off after the missile struck, did its damage. This came unzipped and floated down to Earth.
What can you tell about things like this? When you look at the wheels from it, does this tell you anything other than
it again is that's part of the center wheel, chassis. Again, right near the center wing tank. Obviously, there was plenty of fuel there when this thing was coming down. It was on fire.
I'm going to guess pieces like this with the door similar to the one you talked about before. But let me ask you another thing. Look at these personal effects here. We've talked a lot about these things that people had on board there. Right now, we have many victims of this, presumably in the wreckage, out there now for days. The scene is decaying, the actual evidence you want there. But how do investigators deal with that when you walk into the middle of all this and here are people and what in their lives?
It is the most difficult thing that you can imagine, particularly with children. You see parts of people's lives, you see things that reflect right back to you. I remember being at an accident scene and seeing a book that I was reading in the wreckage. I'll never forget that. And it is that these innocents are still laying in the field this long after the accident is unforgivable.
And the difficulty of dealing with that, and of course, Wolf, the sheer forensics of a scene like this, all the more complicated as each hour and each day goes by and the scene is unattended by professionals.
That crash scene, tell us what you're seeing right now as the sun is coming up.
Well, John, we've been here through the night, and as the sun, and it's been pretty terrible, I've got to say, and as the sun comes up, the sights that we are seeing here, well, they're even worse. Obviously, you can see this, the example, just one part, really, of the wreckage that, as you mentioned, has been scattered across a very wide area. It's a big debris field. It's interesting that you've got a big piece here, and then all the other big pieces are several miles away. But what we are seeing around here are those bodies, so many of them, that are lying, some in the fields, some by the road. There has been some effort by emergency workers here to identify those locations, and you can see that because that's where they've stuck a stick into the ground and attached a little bit of white cloth to it. There are so many pieces of white cloth. It is really, really quite distressing. But as I say, something of a recovery operation underway here, but it is very limited, very small, especially when you consider the scale of the disaster that we're talking about.
And Phil, you were the first network reporter on the scene of this crash, this horrific event. Does it seem like an organized situation, or is it chaotic, and who is in charge there?
It's not chaotic, it just seems so terribly underdone. Who is clearly in charge? Well, that is obviously, and still very much, the pro-Russian rebels who continue to occupy.
One of the people lost on that flight was 25-year-old Caroline Kaiser, a champion rower from Amsterdam and a chemistry student at Indiana University.
So her name is Caroline Kaiser, age 25. T plus 5, that's another 7. and the KK, that could be a 66 for whatever it's worth. But I looked at her name to see if I could find a definition, and I really didn't. It's kind of a strange name. I'm not really an expert at it. But what I did find, scroll down a little bit, was this person here, Mira Durman Caroline, authors to broker. She has quite a list of achievements here. She's a college student, lots of degrees, working on a lot of things. Also from Amsterdam. What grabbed me is quite interesting. I didn't know this was something you could actually study, but it is. She graduated from Amsterdam on mitigation and adaptation strategies. Okay, and just below that, what her second master's is on morality as an alternative to objective reporting amongst development journalists. Let me look at that again. For her second master's on morality as an alternative to objective reporting amongst development journalists. I just thought it was interesting, the match on the strange name. I wonder if there's a secret message there. My first question here would be, whose morality? Somebody's going to insert their morality as an alternative to objective reporting amongst development journalists. Read it again. Let that sink in. What does that mean? Is it connected to this flight, the way they're reporting this story? I would say so. I personally certainly would say so.
Joining me now by phone is her former roommate, Rachel Weigler. Rachel, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this evening?
Well, as well as can be expected.
Mm-hmm. You were roommates and good friends with Caroline at Indiana University, is that correct? How did you hear about this accident?
Yes, Caroline and I were roommates when I moved to Bloomington to take a job, and she was in her third year of working on her PhD at IU in chemistry. I was at work yesterday when the news came on.
I can't even imagine. You know, there are many people watching, and I'm sure you want to pay tribute to your friend. What was she like? Tell us about her.